Hi, this is Andrea Kane, and I'm here with you for HIT 421, Legal Release of Information, Fundamentals of Law. All right, so we are on week 6, which means chapter 9 in our book. If you look at the syllabus, you will see that we are on unit objectives 9.5.1 through 9.5.16. And we are focusing on the legal health record, maintenance, content, documentation, and disposition. If you want to follow along in your textbook, I am on page 169. What are the purposes of the health record? Well, obviously, first and foremost, it's patient care. It's documenting patient treatment and continuity of care. It's also proof of services for reimbursement, proof of quality and effectiveness of care for accreditation, certification, and licensure. It's supporting medical research, supporting education and training, supporting the organization's operational activities, facilitating managerial decision-making to improve quality of patient care, and it's also a legal document, evidence and legal actions. Um, all of us typically say if it isn't documented, it wasn't done. The legal health record is the business record that would be disclosed upon valid request. The content of the legal health record must be identified and managed by inventorying all source systems contributing to the record. Organizations must determine what becomes part of the legal health record, analyzing inclusion of items such as emails, videos, and metadata. Each organization determines what is their legal health record. And the legal health record may not be everything in your EHR, but it's up to your organization to determine what that will be. According to HIPAA, a designated record set, or a DRS, is used in whole or in part to make decisions about individuals and include health records and records involving billing, insurance enrollment, and coverage. A designated record set encompasses more information than what is usually considered part of the legal health record. So, okay, you talked about we've got this huge EHR that has all sorts of everything in it. Then you get down to the designated record set, and from there, a smaller portion is the legal health record. So you have those determinations. So make sure that you're understanding what those are. When you're talking about paper versus electronic health records, there are 6 key differences: large volume, ease of duplication, persistence, looking at electronic documents that are more likely to continue to exist, metadata, tracking data about data, automatic updates, obsolescence with outdated programs or equipment, and searchable and dispersed in multiple locations is more likely with electronic records. So when you're thinking about your legal health record, typically there's much more to consider when you're talking electronic. Looking at the Uniform Photographic Copies of Business and Public Records as Evidence Act, or the UPA. There are federal and state versions that exist. It supports the transition from paper to electronic storage of information and states that the reproduction of any record that has been retained in the regular course of business and kept by a process which accurately reproduces the original in any medium will be admissible as evidence. So make sure that you are very familiar with this. In terms of maintenance, content, documentation, and disposition, and we're still talking about the legal health record, there are federal laws. You have your Medicare conditions of participation. There are state laws or state statutes, accreditation standards by whoever you're being accredited by. There are professional guidelines. You would go out to the AHIMA website to take a look at those. And then you have your facility policies. They may be facility policies and procedures, and you hope that they're also outlined in your medical staff bylaws, rules, and regs. Documentation principles, language. Entries should be specific, objective, factual, and devoid of generalizations or vagueness. They need to be the response to care needs to be documented. If there are any deviations from standard treatment and patient responses, that must be documented completely to explain why there was that deviation and what the benefit was to the patient. Situations that result in incident reports should be documented objectively. You don't ever want to have blame or failure documented in the record. That should be handled separately, and definitely in a way that's not discoverable. You need to make sure that you have policies on who may document in the medical record, and that has to be also in your medical staff bylaws, who is authorized to do so. And then you need to be auditing and making sure that those who do have that authorization are doing it in a high quality, complete manner, and making sure that it's authenticated. Need to be looking for gaps in omissions that would detract from the chronology of care and increase likelihood of liability. You want to eliminate gaps that are spaces left between entries in paper health records. Gaps in omissions in time refer to lengths of time when there is no documentation. Orders, written and verbal, need to be a part of that. Illegibility of orders is being resolved through CPOE, computerized provider order entry is what CPOE stands for. Medical staff bylaws typically specify the categories of personnel who may accept orders. They have to. That's a Joint Commission requirement, among others. All orders must be authenticated, but they have to be verified. So you have to do the read back, verify process, and that has to be documented as well when you're dealing with verbal orders. Most places today, again, have EHR, so none of this is an issue because it's all computer provider order entry, which resolves an awful lot of these issues. Concurrent review of orders ensures timely authentication. If you have a hostile patient, you need to make sure that you are documenting objectively and that that's clear in the record and how you're dealing with that. You may end up needing to get a psychiatrist to come and do a consult with a patient, may see if a medication needs to be adjusted or begun, or if there's something else going on with the patient that needs to be addressed. Staff disagreements, differing opinions can be documented in the medical record if they're pertinent to the care. For instance, if you have a consultant and an attending and they're sort of disagreeing about the care, that's not a bad thing as long as it's done respectfully and the language is objective and factual. And really it's focused on the patient care and explaining what's behind that. And most of those conversations really should be done off the record. If you want to know the truth of it, if you're getting staff disagreements being documented in the medical record, that's a sign right there that your organization has some communication issues with the medical staff that need to be worked out immediately. Those conversations should be taking place outside of the medical record so that what's in the medical record shows what they're in agreement on and how they're going to move forward. Injuries that result from criminal activity, obviously those need to be documented objectively and factually, and it needs to include some statements and identification, thorough description of injuries, and photos. Liability for improper entries is heightened if the documentation is missing, incomplete, biased, critical, or based on opinions rather than fact. Data governance, you actually will have a class in that. It's a 1-credit class, but where it talks about the legally defensible record and data governance is with data creation, emphasis on accuracy and integrity. And then information governance associated with information after it's been created, and that emphasis is on safeguarding and protection. You need to make sure that authentication or attestation, that those occur. Authenticity is the genuineness of a record, that it is what it purports to be. And authentication is a security process that verifies the person's identity and authorizes system access. It basically is your access code, or back in the days of paper record, it was your signature. It verified that you were who you were and that you were authorized to do what you were doing, and you were authorizing that information. Attestation is, again, the signature showing authorship and that sort of thing. If you are in a paper environment and they are still using rubber signature stamps, that is very, very, very bad practice because for a long time there's a history of that being abused. And there are some federal rules about use of rubber stamps where that it has been banned in many places for many reasons. So in this day and age, everything's electronic. So as much as we have to teach you about the theory of paper, you really don't need to know that. Uniform Electronic Transactions Act. This made electronic records and signatures legally equivalent to paper records and handwritten signatures. Then there was the Electronic Signatures in Global and National Commerce Act, which is also known as e-sign. It validates electronic records and signatures to be legally recognized for interstate and foreign commerce. Attestation issues. Sometimes you can get counter signatures, multiple attestations. You can have attestation on behalf of another. You can have auto attestation, batch signing, and scribes. And so these are issues that have to be worked out on an organizational level as to how this is going to be handled and what you're going to do to educate on it and prevent it or use it in very limited circumstances. Scribes are primarily used in the ED for ED physicians to save them time on documentation. I've seen situations without scribes. I've seen situations with scribes. It really comes down to providers and scribes and how good they are and how well the process is defined and audited. Scribes can work. They're not my favorite thing personally, but I've seen them work and work well. But I've also seen them work and work very poorly. That's not a reflection on the individual scribe, not necessarily. It can also be a process issue. So as with anything, it has its good points, its bad points. It really comes down to how it plays out in real life and how it's managed in real life. Excuse me. The integrity of the electronic record content is very critical when you're talking about a legally defensible record. The metadata provides background information about actions that affect creation, revision, and access to data. And then you have documentation templates that increase efficiency and structure. Sometimes they can create integrity issues, but not always. Typically, it's better to use documentation templates because you're then assured that you're going to get the same information every time, that at least it's being addressed, whether or not it's being completed appropriately or otherwise. That's more auditing based. Accuracy is the degree to which the information in the record reflects what actually happened, and you definitely want that to consistently be what occurs. They want us to talk here about authorship and cut, copy, paste, also known as cloning. Information, the problem with cut, copy, paste, or cloning is that information may be placed on the wrong encounter or wrong patient. It is a form of medical plagiarism because you're using another's documentation without permission to save yourself time, work, effort, and thought. And there are risks of healthcare fraud when documentation from another provider or another patient's record is used. Again, this is an issue like scribes where I've seen both sides. I've seen it work well. I've seen it work very poorly. It comes down to your organization and individual physicians. It comes down to auditing and provider education. So although cut, copy, paste cloning is not necessarily a good thing, it may somewhat be an evil necessity. And you have to work to find a way to make it as legally defensible as possible, I suppose you'd say. Abbreviations. Every organization has to have an approved abbreviations list, and you have to educate on that. You cannot use Joint Commission prohibited abbreviations. And when Joint Commission comes, they want to see your approved abbreviations. They want to know how you're auditing that. They want to look at your records to see if the Joint Commission prohibited abbreviations are being used. And again, with EHRs, a lot of this stuff goes away. And then, of course, to make your record legally defensible, you want to make sure you have good legibility. Again, with EHRs, legibility really is a minimal issue. Changes to the health record. It should only be done according to organizational policy, and it should be done exactly how the organizational policy says it should be done. Revision means you're replacing inaccurate information with accurate information after attestation. And there are such things called late entries, amendments, and addendums. A late entry is an entry that was missed or not written in a timely manner. And an amendment means that information was added to support or clarified, or added to support or clarify. An addendum means new documentation was added to the original entry after attestation. Make sure that you know those definitions: late entry, amendment, and addendum. And it's very important. And these, again, should be laid out in your organization's policy already. You shouldn't have to do anything but make sure that you audit to see that these are being done appropriately and that education is occurring with all of those who are able to make entries into the medical record. And then again, because it's happening electronically, the system is capturing it, and all EHRs have policies or they're built such that they capture each change to the document so that they're able to go back over time and show you, okay, this was changed, then this was changed, then this was changed, who did it, when did they do it, and that sort of thing. Removal, deletion, and retraction. Most EHRs limit that severely. Some don't permit it at all, which I think is the wisest of all of that. You're better off to amend or to addend rather than delete or retract. Version management, this is what I was talking about before. This is how an organization handles numerous iterations of a document, and it has to be maintained. Then we get back to timeliness and completeness. The timeliness, the documentation has to be completed promptly at or near the time of event. It needs to be complete, it needs to be comprehensive, and organizations have to define timeliness and completeness. Those timeliness and completeness are mandated by accrediting and licensure bodies, and they are important from an evidentiary standpoint. So we're still talking legally defensible record. Now we're on to printing, and it gives us a list of problems. Most organizations have strict printing policies, not just because of these problems, but also because of the cost of paper and the fact that it's hard to control where paper goes and all of that. So if there is printing, they limit who has the authority to print. It has to be tracked in an audit trail, and then the format and versions of the document are typically on it. Personal health records, this is a system, this is a system where patients are able to keep their own health record. There are standalone PHRs, tethered PHRs, information patients upload into there, that's their own information. Patients control PHRs, and there have been some questions about whether or not the PHR should be integrated into the legal health record, and I think at this point the answer to that has been no. That may happen in the future, we'll see. Identification, retention, and disposition. Well, when it comes to the MPI and the EMPI and anything that is diagnosis related, procedure related, those types of things, it's permanent retention. Health record retention depends on your state's laws. It also depends on your organization and how they choose to pursue that, and your EHR. And then there are some accreditation standards. AHIMA does have some recommendations, which they call best practice. And then you have to consider operational needs. Record retention has changed so much when you look at paper records versus electronic records. But just something to be aware of. Health record disposition, this is how you destroy records, and all organizations have destruction policies and procedures where they've already gone through legal, they've considered what their state requires of them, and they put that into policy form as to how that will be destroyed to make sure that the information, whether it's paper or electronic, cannot be accessed. Again, this just talks about if you're transferring it, how do you handle it? A long time ago, like 10 years or 15 or 20 years ago now, um, organizations moved from paper to electronic, and they did a lot of scanning, and then they just, once it was scanned into the electronic system, then they destroyed the paper. And that's really what this is talking about. Um, the organization can be liable for failure to produce a paper record that should be available according to policy and applicable law. That's absolutely true. And that is it for chapter 9. I wish you a wonderful week. I hope you stay warm and look forward to talking to you again next week on chapters 10 and 11.